Well, welcome everybody to the latest episode of the HR Tech Chat video podcast. Almost got that wrong. Thank you everyone for joining us. This is the next installment of what's going to be a regular series of internal HR Tech Chats that I myself, Brent Skinner, co-founder of 360 Insights, will be having with Jen Dole, who is past her 90-day mark or milestone with us, and really acting as if she's been here a lot longer than that. It's great. No, I mean that in a good way.
Okay, thank you.
Really sort of making her mark, and just a fantastic, wonderful addition to the team. And for readers, viewers, listeners, however you're attending this podcast, who don't know, Jen and I were both at Cornerstone On Demand before being here together at 360 Insights. A little bit of background there. And
Yeah,
Jen,
I guess it's a different way of thinking about hiring alumni, right?
yeah,
Which is kind of
yeah.
cool.
It is pretty cool. What's even cooler is that we didn't even know we were at Cornerstone at the same time until we met not long before we both left Cornerstone at the big 20-year anniversary bash in Palm Springs. That was a fun time, very fun time.
Yeah, I have a little fear of missing out and not being at Convergence this year, but working on it.
Me too. But we didn't miss out on anything at the 20-year anyway. So yeah. So Jen, you've joined us to do a real deep dive into talent management, what we're calling talent management. And today, you and I had a really interesting conversation on the back channel offline sort of the other day around what does talent management mean today? Why are we calling it that? Where is the term going? What are some of the new terms around it these days? And that's what we want to talk about today. It's going to be kind of a free form conversation. We have a few things we want to touch on, but what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, when we got started talking about this, it was, how HR technology today is just blending into different areas. So you see recruiting technology touching into talent management technology as probably the best example, where you see recruiters moving into internal talent mobility. Who owns that? And we just got thinking, like, what should we be calling this? Is it talent management? Is it even human resources anymore? Is it people leaders? Owns the employee experience? I mean, it was confusing us. I can only imagine how it confuses the buyers during this experience.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and frankly, this kind of touches on something a little bit bigger than we want to focus on today, but I want to bring it up here is that, I think about the terms human resources versus human capital management, and I almost prefer human resources because at least the humans are resources, as opposed to capital to be managed. It's some of the terms that we use in this space, I think, are a little bit unfortunate, but they're sort of what's the artifacts from a bygone era when the terms we're using today did feel better than what it was being called before that, and also when there was sort of the advent of the entire notion of talent management, which I think keep me honest here, I think it was around maybe about 30 years ago when it really started emerging and becoming. Somebody coined the term. I forget who it was. Should have researched it before our conversation.
Yeah.
But
well, I think, it started as personnel. I mean,
oh yeah, right.
That's what I remember it as long time ago.
And you know what? Sorry, I just got to kind of shoehorn this in. It reminds me, there's some places still call it the personnel department, especially in the public domain. We actually had a conversation with the CHRO. This was almost 2 years ago now, but we had a conversation with the then new CHRO, or then sort of new CHRO in the city of Memphis. and they brought her in, and they wanted to do an entire sort of an employer culture change. And one of the things that they did, I believe, is they changed the name from calling it a personnel department to, I think, HR. So, kind of and she did a bunch of stuff that was really interesting, and that's not what this is about today either. But what's really interesting here is that, so we call it talent management here at 360 Insights, but we're fully aware of the fact, we're cognizant of the fact that it's not, it's a lot more blending, like you said today. Even the conventional silos of talent management, tell me if I'm missing any, but compensation planning, succession management, I always mix those up, whether it's planning or management on one or the other. It's just a little mind cramp I have. But then there's performance management and probably something else that I'm missing. But these very well-defined sort of silos. And it's really interesting today, I would say, unless you're a sort of a new, like a smaller company, just trying to wrap your heads around, systematize your HR, right? Unless you're that, I would say it's even a mistake to go to a vendor thinking I have a performance management silo problem to solve, or to be a vendor and go to a user or prospect and say, listen to them and say, oh yes, we have a performance management silo solution for you. That to me is just, we're beyond that when you get away from small businesses. But
there's so much to unpack with what you just said, Brent. And I'm gonna say, where do we begin? Because I think that's probably what HR teams are saying, particularly in the smaller organizations where they're very lean and they're responsible for everything. Where do they begin?
Yeah. Where do they?
They're reading about all these trends in workforce intelligence and the future of work. Where do they begin? What does it mean for them?
Well, honestly, to be a little bit ironic here, they probably should think of it more as a siloed thing, systematized thing, right? And this is what we're really talking about is, the state of the art of the thinking around workflow and also technology for HCM versus the realities of just getting things under control.
Yeah, so it's sort of looking at kind of getting the workflows right. And understanding what works for your organization.
So many organizations, you're absolutely right. So many organizations, HR really, let's think about it. I mean, let's be honest. When you're a startup, a new company, HR isn't the first thing. HR is something that you realize you have to do after you've hired some people. It's something. It's just this probably isn't the right word, and it's not meant to be like an insult or anything like that. But it's an afterthought. It's often an afterthought, and when a company is very small, just beginning, and we've heard the terms accidental HR people. Often some of the some of the founders or the very first employees in the organization end up just they spread the load in terms of this growing administrative tedium that just has to be done. And at some point, somebody cries uncle or raises a stink, or maybe it's not that bad. Maybe it's more amicable, but at some point somebody says, look, we need an HR person.
Yeah.
And then they hire somebody. And maybe it's at that point, or maybe it's later on.
As these small organizations are growing fast, they need that support in recruiting. That's probably where they begin, right? Because you want to take that heavy lift off of your people leaders. Because we could all be spending all our time on recruiting in small businesses to grow the team.
Probably that in payroll, right? Payroll is like the absolute, that is
Mhm.
like, I like to say, if there's anything that's absolutely essential to employing people, it is paying them.
True.
I mean, that's, and then depending on what kind of company you are, however small you are, you might need a time and attendance solution just to keep that straight. At some point, the Excel spreadsheet isn't working anymore. And you're absolutely right about recruiting, right? Because if you start growing, you reach that inflection point. You knew we were going to work the term inflection point into this conversation today, but you reach that inflection point where you start to grow, and there's no way you can't, as a founder of an organization, at some point you have to delegate that to somebody else. And this is where it gets interesting, because I've seen use cases, I'm sure you have too, where sometimes when they bring in the dedicated HR person, when we say HR, right, we mean the whole kit and caboodle. We're talking
Yep.
about talent management, talent acquisition, and everything.
Learning development. Yep.
Exactly.
The whole
They
gamut.
bring that person, yeah, they bring that person in, and maybe they don't give them technology. They just want that person to do all the admin, and maybe they give them a nice title. But sometimes they do understand that they need to have the technology too, or maybe the new person coming in, there's all sorts of dynamics. Maybe the new person coming in says, hey, we need some technology for this. But this is just to get back to the main point, though. This is about systematizing, right? You're at a totally different stage of your of the organizational life cycle vis-a-vis HCM than in a mature, many years old sort of enterprise organization.
Yeah, and very different challenges that you're handling. And the way that you're going to make the business case to improve is going to be different in a small organization or a medium-sized organization versus an enterprise organization.
And it means different things to leadership at those different stages too, right? I mean, you think about there's a systematizing stage of things. When you're small, you're a lean HR team. I love that term. It's a newer company, smaller company. Maybe it's a company that's been small for a very long time.
Yep.
We've seen that too. But you have this situation where this is very much a cost center sort of thing. This is about getting the administrative load under control, lowering labor expenditure related to this must complete, but it's in no way strategic work, anything like that. And so you're in that kind of a situation as an organization, as an HR department. Your leadership recognized that they needed to solve for this. So it's not like you're, what's the word? You're not invisible. That's the word I was looking for.
Right.
Invisible to them, and they see you as mission critical, but they don't see you as strategic.
I know, but think about this. Small companies are competing with large companies for talent.
Yeah.
So it has to be strategic.
That's a really great point. And so what are some of the ways to, well, think about this. So that you have leadership at the organization, and they may not realize that is in fact strategic, because it was such an administrative nuisance, right? So what are some of the ways that maybe we'll have to think about this one a little bit more, I don't know, but what are some of the ways that a small business's HR department might be able to convince their leadership or persuade their leadership that, hey, we need to be strategic with, say, let's start with talent acquisition. I can see how it can be everything, but because we're competing for talent with these big players that are being strategic with their talent acquisition. Maybe that answers the question. I don't know.
Well, I'm going to borrow a phrase from a mentor of mine.
Okay.
There are abstract and concrete ways that need to be thought of when, as a small organization, trying to do this. How do you like that? It's true.
I love that. Thank you, young grasshopper. Just, I will be honest though that this is a little bit of inside baseball. Here at 360 Insights, we have a concept of concrete and abstract HCM that sort of occurred to me. It was this idea, it almost fell out of the sky. I feel like it almost didn't come from me. I just want to be clear about that. I said, oh yeah, HCM has sort of a concrete side and an abstract side. We have all this administrative stuff. It's readily quantifiable, often from a labor expenditure type of perspective, right? And it's very, very easily translates to the accounting spreadsheet, yada, yada, yada. And then we have all this, and it's what the CFO really pays attention to, and maybe others in leadership too, because it makes so much sense to them with their MBAs and this sort of thing, right? But then you have the whole abstract side of HCM, that's about building a really strong, healthy, robust employer culture, paying attention, realizing that the employee's experience actually is important. It's important, even though you may not be able to actually quantify it right away in the spreadsheet. All of these things have an impact on the numbers for the company, but there's no way to actually predict what the actual number is going to be. And so you can put it into a spreadsheet, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And yeah.
Yeah. And I was just going to say that in my short period of time here learning, I've taken that to a little bit deeper and talked about efficiencies and empathy.
Yeah.
And again, back to this point of where do you begin as a small organization trying to tackle this and compete for talent? You've got to have efficiencies, right?
Yeah.
And those efficiencies are going to be what appeals to your executives. But you also need to have empathy, because that's what's going to appeal to the top talent you're trying to recruit into your organization. So there's this fine balance that needs to be worked into the business case of how you're going to manage this challenge.
And you're absolutely right about that. A. B. I love the concept of efficiency and empathy, because and you really made me think when you came up with it, because it occurred to me, well, wait a minute. You can't be empathetic unless you have efficiencies in place, because if you're inefficient in your HR processes, or let's call it your HCM process, fine distinction, but anyway, if you're inefficient in those, you're not going to have any time to be empathetic as an HR department, to argue for empathy in favor of empathy to leadership, or certainly not as an organization, right? And what's interesting about it also, if you think about it, is you think about sort of the evolution of, and it's different in every organization. Every organization, is in a different point in this evolution.
Yes.
But at some point, you're beating a dead horse if you're still focusing on efficiencies. I mean, just give it up, man. I mean, okay, yeah, right. You're at some point you're efficient enough where if you're not pivoting to focus on empathy, to set your sights on those aspirational abstract HCM things, employer culture, employee experience, then you're not doing it right. you're not
going to get the talent that your business needs.
Exactly. And this does dovetail nicely into the terms, what's going on with these terms in HCM today, because when you're really focused on efficiencies, and I would roll systematizing into, not even going to try to say it the way, systematization. Anyway, now I'm going to roll that into the efficiencies side of things, because they really kind of go hand in hand, right? You're at that point of thinking where you're just trying to get things under, I love to say this, you're trying to get things under control, right? Because there's a certain pandemonium that can absolutely take over in HR, and you have to get it under control. But once you have that in place, once you've systematized, now it's time, once you've kind of gotten the foundation, and it's like a foundation, right? Now you have the foundation. Okay, how can I think, my house doesn't have to have just four sides, right? My house doesn't have to, isn't just one big room that's 3 stories high or whatever, right? I have all sorts of different, I have a great room or a living room. I have a you know, a jacuzzi here. Or what, I'm not describing my house necessarily. But you know, I'm describing what I'd love my house to be. But in any event, you know, you're building for, you're thinking, you know, you're thinking sort of fluidly in terms of what's going on with talent management. And this gets to the blending piece of it. We've seen it. We're not going to name names, but we've seen people in our space start to talk about talent management, even name it something else, or they call it the employee experience. We've seen that as a term, and we're going to do another one of these in the near future where we, you know, what's a better term for employee experience, because it's definitely a step up, but maybe not a better term, but what's the next thing could be called. But we've also seen it as future of work, right? Which it's a good one. But it's this idea.
The workforce intelligence.
Yeah. Because you have all this AI that's sort of infusing, and we have a greater, ever greater sophistication when it comes to analytics too, right?
Yeah, all of that feels very efficient.
Yes, it does. It doesn't it? Yeah, yeah. We wouldn't be able to talk about the future of work if we were inefficient in HR, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. You know what's interesting too is getting back to something we were talking about a moment ago around leadership and how they view the HR function. I don't think there's really any company out there that doesn't see HR as important, right? You know, it's a mission critical. This stuff has to get done. It's not something we can just dispense with, right?
Well, even particularly after the last couple of years, I think HR was the hero of in the workplace around the pandemic.
Absolutely.
Safe.
Right. That's what's interesting about the disruption. We talk about disruption and how it can really kind of leave a lasting impact on how people view things, and because it's so jolting. And it was interesting to see so many most organizations, you know, thinking about the employee experience and how important it is to productivity. I think before the pandemic, people might have, you know, you might have had a lot of organizational leaders saying, well, I mean, you know, yeah, okay, that's great. But, you know, no, okay, thanks for saying that. You know, it's just kind of like a sort of a, maybe not seen as that important, but all of a sudden, when we have the extreme, where everybody suddenly has to go work. I mean, we're talking about certain segments of the marketplace. There were people where they were still out there in the wild, you know, line people, you know, people in the power company, all that kind of stuff. But at least for, you know, in the professional managerial space, right? We had that massive en masse move to work from home, right? And all of a sudden, oh man, the employee experience is tantamount, or we're gonna go way down in productivity. Oh, hey, maybe the employee experience actually is important when it comes to productivity. What I love about that is, right, productivity is something that, oh, we're going to raise productivity, that actually translates to an accounting spreadsheet.
Back to efficiencies.
Yes, exactly.
But what I think about it is the technology bringing in the efficiencies allows the people to be more human. So once upon a time, we thought that the computers were going to eliminate all these jobs and all these people. But really what it did was just ask us to be a little bit more creative and focus more on the people side of things.
Yeah, it gave us the white space to do that.
Yep.
Yeah, it's so funny how so many things have sort of that unintended effect. When you think about, Jen, you know, organizational leadership and how to make HR seem, how to make empathy in HR seem like a strategic imperative, what comes to mind for you?
What comes to mind for me is really building it into the talent strategy and having it be a CEO conversation.
You're absolutely right about that. I'm so glad you mentioned that. That's such a great insight, because the CEO is sort of like you think about the C-suite, right? And you have your various voices in the C-suite, and the CEO needs to what's the word? Synthesize all of that and convert it into a vision that makes sense and reflects the different perspectives of the various personas in the C-suite and the domains of the enterprise that are tributaries to those different C-suite personas. And what's interesting here is that I remember a long time ago in my career, this was many years ago, I'll say 10 years ago. I know.
A lifetime ago.
There's an organization called Chief Executive, and they publish a magazine, Chief Executive Magazine, and they used to have I don't know if they still have it, they may, but at the time they had a twice yearly conference called CEO to CEO, and at the time it was in New York City, and they would survey the CEOs every time they had the event. This was mid-sized company CEOs, and they'd have some marquee enterprise size, household name brand CEOs that would deliver talks. They would survey the CEOs in attendance, and retaining top talent was, I think one year it was the number one concern. It was never below number 3, if I recall correctly. I do know when I was working with these folks that it was very high on the list. So the CEO is sort of preternaturally sort of disposed to caring about the employee experience. I think that's an easy inference.
Yeah. And so it's having that conversation with the CEO, with the talent strategy, that I see so many vendors doing today, right? They want to help HR leaders get the right conversation in front of the CEO.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And you and I have sort of seen how the sausage is made, having been on the vendor side, right? And for me personally, also at another vendor as well, that I won't name, but in any event, and across the board, when we're talking with vendors and users, especially with our user conversations, there's I'm not so sure vendors are reaching, like having direct conversations with the C-suite necessarily as much as they should when they're making the case.
Well, so I don't know that they need to help the HR leader have the conversation, make the case.
Right.
That's where the real magic is, in educating, informing, and providing the case for HR to go to the CEO.
It's empowering.
It's still their conversation.
Right. Ultimately, you're empowering that
Yes.
line of business leader to be more, to present themselves as more strategic to the organization's leadership. Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point. Going back to the terms, talent management, and all of this, because it's, you and I, we joke sort of on the back channel offline about how difficult sometimes it is to have a very sort of focused and stay focused on one topic when talking about ACM, because it all kind of blends and
So much.
Yeah. But when thinking about the terms, right? Here's my prediction is at some point, I think it's going to be twofold. There's two things are going to happen. I think large enterprise organizations and mature mid-sized organizations, at some point, they're not even going to use the term talent management anymore.
Okay.
I think so. It's going to be, the employee experience is going to be, we've talked about this, whether it's learning or succession planning or performance management. There's so much blending between those things.
Yep.
It's really difficult to talk about it in silos. It almost doesn't make sense anymore. But when we're talking about lean HR teams at small businesses that are still solving for efficiencies and systematizing, maybe it will remain. Maybe the term talent management is sort of the auspices, like sort of like the category under which there are many silos. Maybe that term will go away still, but you'll still be talking about like as discrete activities: performance management, learning.
Mhm.
Those are probably the two that may happen first, and then maybe have compensation management and succession planning after that. What are your thoughts? I mean, this is just a hypothesis of mine. Who knows? 5-10 years from now, someone might come back and say, "Hey, Brent, you were wrong."
I think there's some combination of people, culture, and strategy
Mm.
and business strategy.
People, culture, strategy, and business strategy.
Well, yeah, business strategy is
Right.
one.
Right.
I just said strategy. I think that is where HR can contribute the most to an organization, making sure that they've got a strategy ready workforce.
Mm. You know, what's interesting about that is it really is the natural seat for HR, right? I mean, ultimately, as an HR department should strive to be the go-to resource or the go-to organizational Sherpa, if you will, when there's a question about how to be more effective with our people.
Mhm.
That's when, yeah, you're absolutely right. That's when they become really organizationally strategic. I forget who was I was talking with. It might have been somebody on our Global Executive Advisory Council. I had the conversation many months ago. It's this idea that, and I forget where he saw it, but he shared an idea with me. There was a report where they talking about the chief HR officer and the chief HR operational officer. They were talking about like split. This is kind of an old report from several years ago where they're talking about that. And it's really interesting because it's to me that I'd have to look into it more, but it might be the genesis to the whole, chief people officer phenomenon that we've seen, right? And because the chief people officer and the chief HR officer, if they both exist at an organization, their roles are kind of different.
That is something that I would need to think about more or learn more about how they're different.
Well, me too. Maybe that's one of our next internal HR Tech Chat series conversations.
Maybe. Well,
So,
Brent, this has been great. I love these conversations.
oh, me too. I knew that we would end up trying to boil the ocean today, but that's okay. If we keep at it, maybe we will indeed boil the ocean at some point, which would be great.
Or at least find the right term that encompasses all that HR leaders and teams need to do.
Yeah, that's something that the space really should, and they are, but we should redouble our efforts. So I say we, I mean the royal we, all of us in HCM, we really should be thinking about that very, very strongly. And that really was kind of the impetus for this conversation today. We hope to have maybe made a dent in that for everyone.
Yeah, or get more people thinking about it.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear what people are thinking about it.
Well, that's a good clarion call, folks. If you're listening in and you want to kind of get in touch with us and speak with us about your your own experience in HCM. We love to hear your stories. So just go to the website. It's very easy to find from the drop-down menu, and we'll be in touch.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Talk with you again soon.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
Brent.